This is the service 29X to Brighton.
The next stop is the War Memorial. The next stop is Central Station. The next stop is Chapel Place. The next stop is the Pantiles. The next stop is Sainsbury's. The next stop is Broadwater Lane. The next stop is Somervale Road. The next stop is Broadwater Down. The next stop is Bunny Lane. The next stop is Erich Green Church. The next stop is Shant Farm Road. The next stop is Erich Horston. The next stop is Erich Station. The next stop is Sandhill Lane. The next stop is the Boar's Head Inn. The next stop is The next stop is Erich Road. The next stop is Oakhurst Drive. The next stop is the Leisure Centre. The next stop is Crowler Cross. The next stop is Goldsmiths Avenue. The next stop is Rowan House. The next stop is the Blue Anchor. The next stop is Southview Road. The next stop is Fielden Road. The next stop is North Carry. The next stop is the Crone Gate. The next stop is Barnesgate Palace. The next stop is Heronsgill Church. The next stop is Perryman's Lane. The next stop is Edward Farm. The next stop is Cobdown Lane. The next stop is Uckfield Bus Station. The next stop is Little Horsted. The next stop is Woodlands. The next stop is Horsted Lane. The next stop is Hartwell House. The next stop is Isfield Old Ship. The next stop is the top of Clay Hill. The next stop is Bark Lane. The next stop is the Coffee Inn. The next stop is the Camp Lane. The next stop is Raymond Lane. The next stop is Southern Cottages. The next stop is Mooring Down. The next stop is Church Lane. The next stop is Morling Street. The next stop is Phoenix Causeway. The next stop is The next stop is Falmouth Station. The next stop is Colddean Lane. The next stop is Woolscombe Way. Please watch out for cyclists when you leave the bus. The next stop is Brighton University. Please watch out for cyclists when you leave the bus. The next stop is Lewis Road Garage. The next stop is Elm Grove. The next stop is St Peter's Church. The next stop is Valley Gardens. The next stop is the Old Steam. The next stop is North Street. The next stop is Imperial Arcade. This bus terminates here. All change, please.
Thank you for travelling with Brighton and Hove buses.